Yakuza games are hard to review. I'd loosely categorize them as action-adventures, although they have RPG systems, brawler combat, dozens of mini-games to each title, hours of cutscenes, a tremendous breadth of gameplay. Some of it shallow, some of it deep. It's hard to choose what to focus on. And besides that, every 5 minutes the most unexpected thing happens and I need to pause my game and clip the video.
So please, no more words. At least for right now, I want you to only have eyes for me.
It's zany, it's off the wall, it's heartfelt, and often straddles an odd line between moralistic example making and a sort of toothless depravity. It follows the stance-switching brawler template of the prior games, and dwells heavily on a new ship-to-ship high seas battle mechanic. To start out though, this is actually my first review for a Like a Dragon game, so a little recap. It depends on how you count them, but there's around 20 titles in the series at this point. I've only played a handful of them, and only grabbed the Platinum Trophy on the one that didn't require learning Mahjong. I will never learn Mahjong. I'm just a smidge beyond a series newcomer, but still far removed from the true diehards. Here's my impression on what makes a typical Yakuza game. The main storyline is a crime drama, full of deceitful leaders, betrayers, a near-fatal injury, dudes ripping their shirts off to fight, powerful informants, the finding and breaking of brotherhood, a helpless child to protect. And the protagonist is always excessively honorable, somehow both a surrogate father and a crime lord with the idealism of a preteen. They normally take place in a very contained, densely packed cityscape, usually no more than a few city blocks. Outside of the main story, the games are populated by a staggering amount of side content. Arcades, bar games, deep diversions, and wacky side stories. There's a constant tonal tension between the main plot, these scenes of cigarette-pickled gangsters hashing out their allegiances and organizing assassinations, and the oddly lighthearted side content, the go-kart racing and miscellaneous do-goodery. In this world, every argument is solved by a beatdown. No matter how high the stakes, everyone can talk it out after an ass gets whooped. Guns are useless in battle, but if you see one in a cutscene, somebody's about to die. There's also a weird sexual undercurrent running through each of the games. The main characters are permanently chaste, but the story generally weaves into the seedy underbelly of Japan's vast network of escort bars and brothels. We're constantly butting up against unusual fetishes, flashers, and fan service. The series regularly dips its toes into becoming weirdo shit, but it never falls too deeply into the muck, and the more questionable stuff is usually buried in the side quests. In Pirate Yakuza, for example, if you complete a string of quests, you unlock a live-action short film starring one of the voice actors as he tries to woo 5 women. It's stilted, it's bizarre, and it feels like it could break into softcore at any moment. And it would feel right at home buried in the extras of some game from the late 90s. I am glad there's a studio out there keeping these oddball traditions alive, of putting things in the game just because the designers think it'd be fun or funny. Usually they're right. Usually. There's been a real loss of that as games have increasingly become the blanched and homogeneous financial vehicles of consolidated multinational corporations. Back to the series, though. The gangster trappings are mostly cosmetic. The games rarely acknowledge the horrible damage the protagonist's Yakuza connections have on a community. They're focused more on codes of honor, blood feuds, that sort of thing. And it does at times feel like the Yakuza in these games are presented more like the larger-than-life knights of chivalry tales, the Lancelots and Rolands. By that logic, the protagonist of Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is Don Quixote, a mostly insane 60-year-old man washed ashore with amnesia. Majima is rescued by an island child. One thing leads to another, and we're embarking on a picaroon journey in modern-day Hawaii, all in search of a legendary treasure hoard said to contain the elixir of eternal life. There's an inversion of the usual tone balance. Since it's starring Majima and the setting is, on its face, bonkers, it's much more lighthearted throughout the main story with only occasional dips into the serious drama. It kept me chuckling throughout. Most of the drama sections felt a little flat, although without giving too much away, I admit the post-credits sequence made me tear up a little.
Wisdom there.
Every game has music, but Yakuza in Hawaii has music. A sizable chunk of the Sega back catalog is available to play in this game. You can cruise around to Sonic themes, Master System tunes I've never heard of, or the series standards. These games tend to be iterative, reusing and repurposing assets and quest lines from the prior titles, and it's a trend that continues. After Majima takes over the new ship, we're treated to a new theme song.
Waters unknown?
Damn right!
To waters unknown!
Heave-ho, off we go! On our ship to waters unknown. Welcome aboard, there's no stopping us now that we're chasing after our dreams. Take the helm and take heart, take your fill and take care. We'll be rich as we can be, just as long as we believe, and we'll always believe. Heave-ho, off we go! On our ship to waters unknown.
Other than that, it continues using the series standards for tone setting. Sound and music design has long been a strength of the Yakuza series. I remember Yakuza 0 was the first game I played where I was genuinely impressed by the sound design, the tactile clackiness of Japan in the 80s. I'll admit that I used to constantly listen to CDs instead of in-game sound when I was younger. I still remember beating Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Om while wearing out the White Album. And whenever I hear the Mountain Goats, I think of Mad Max. Yakuza in Hawaii maintains the solid, appealing textures of the soundscape.
What's that? The corn you mentioned earlier?
In particular, I found myself weirdly attached to the default footstep sound for reasons I can't really explain. It's also highly effective at using music, both long background tunes and short little tonal informants, to effectively control the mood of scenes. The soundscape remains a high point. The brawler mechanics of Pirate Yakuza are subtly different. As far as I could tell, there were no actual stance switching combos, and the combo attacks in general are more basic. Theoretically, I could combo stance switching together to make longer strings of attach, but often it was simply faster to duck and weave in the Sea Dog style. This new piratical brawling also uses a few gadgets, including guns and a grappling hook, that give us a bit more mobility and control over the battlefield, and generally seemed much more effective at dealing with everything the game had to throw at me. It's also lacking a bit of the brawling aspects that the series is famous for. You won't be swinging many motorcycles as you smash some guy's face in. Like the predecessors, your normal light and heavy combos build up a heat gauge, which ultimately allows you to trigger a more damaging cutaway attack. After enough heat actions, you can trigger an ultimate technique, which are usually powerful enough to end whichever fight you're in. Heat, health, and ultimate energy carry over fight to fight, and there's an RPG-style menu for consumables we can use in some fights to restore health or charge the heat gauge up even further. We also have two types of currency. Gone is yen, we now use cold hard cash, and pirate reputation, to unlock new moves and upgrades, both for Majima and his ship, the Goromaru. The biggest change doesn't become apparent immediately. As we progress and build up our scallywag crew, we will frequently enter combat with some or all of our crew as allies. In a sense, the game is slouching towards Dynasty Warriors. There are enemy lieutenants to focus down and lots of chaff to cut through. I was impressed by the size of some of these battles, with a few sprawling to over 100 units in a scene. and equally impressed that each one of my crew members was an individual from the world I plucked up, trained, and dropped into a battle. It's really cool to see the army you've recruited from scratch, to see soldiers that you can immediately recognize with unique weapons and silhouettes, rather than an army of clones. Other than that, the game's combat felt comparatively easy. I started on normal difficulty and upped it before the tutorial was over. Enemies die in a few hits, and even if there were complex combos, they wouldn't be relevant. There's still a block, parry, and sidestep system, although the block button on my controller actually completely died in the middle of the game, and yet I still had a fairly easy time without that option. Only the final boss gave me the feel of a Yakuza boss, with difficult but telegraphed attacks, last-second potion chugging, and increasing challenge through multiple stages. I admit I dropped back to normal to take out the secret boss, but I didn't really experience any hiccups in the main story. It's possible the lack of difficulty may solely be because I've become familiar with the series and the combat isn't too far from the earlier games. But I do suspect it's actually easier than the others, because the majority of our fights include multiple allies to help us grind through enemies. That, and all of our character upgrade options are unlocked from the start. I may have simply over-upgraded my health and damage before it was necessary, which is more a problem with the progression system as a whole. I guess I'll never be sure. New to the series is ship-to-ship combat. The sailing mechanics were a bit baffling at first, defying most of the expectations I have for the genre from games like Black Flag or Sid Meier's Pirates. In the simplest terms, I'd say the ship combat is just very arcadey. The ship sections are contained to relatively small maps, populated with a handful of seagoing encounters and island-based brawling sections. The boss-level ship battles also resolve with boarding actions that consist of crew-size brawls. We're not given any options for ship types, there's only one ship, with a few upgrades available. Sailing has a top speed that we quickly hit through normal acceleration, and then a limited number of refillable boosts that we use to quickly maneuver out of lines of fire, or to Tokyo drift into a new firing solution. These naval engagements weren't what I was expecting, but were very fun and tense, constantly veering around to line up broadsides, drifting through the enemy flotilla and raking a hull with machine gun fire, leaping away from the wheel mid-fight to pop smoke and put out a fire. But it fails to capture the traditional feeling of sailing. There's no wind direction to account for, and although we hit waves and storms, the environment doesn't particularly affect our movement or become much of a tactical consideration. The closest parallel experience for me is probably Star Sector. The short distance boosts to weave between deadly lines of fire, delivering that perfect broadside and then zipping away. But there's a definite absence of the exploration and freedom I typically associate with pirate games. Instead of sailing the open seas, we use a menu to teleport between a handful of coves. Once we hit up the few marked areas, the sailing maps feel dead. The world feels empty and tightly bound. At odds with the densely packed city districts the series is known for. It took around 50 hours for me to collect all the achievements and tucker myself out on the minigames. Probably around 15 hours of that was spent in cutscenes and dialogue. The writing is consistently very clever and effective, and I generally found it highly entertaining, although I'll admit there were a few times when my attention wandered in the middle of a cutscene, or when I skipped rapid fire through dialogue. It wasn't an issue with the quality of the writing, rather the sheer volume. These games always feel like they're made to be played slowly. The plot recaps at the start of each chapter, there's dozens of easy stopping points to get lost in the minigames. I finished this one out in around 3 days. In retrospect, rushing through it is probably the worst way to play a Yakuza game, and I regret not taking a little more time to really drift through Honolulu. If you pick this one up, I'd recommend taking your time with it. Overall, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii was a really good time. It doesn't quite scratch the deep itch of a pure pirate game, but it's overall a really solid entry into the Yakuza franchise. The ship combat wasn't what I expected, but what I got was still a hoot and a half. Maybe 2 hoots. On the trusty pain scale, I'd rate it painless. When the majority of the runtime is spent grinning like an idiot, I'd say the game was a good time. And I barely even touched on the minigames. Well, that's all for my 35th review. If anyone knows a way to sell out and get a new controller, let me know in the comments. I'd love to sell out. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, see you.